one of the most important aspects of doing this event for us was getting not only news, but getting important comments and an understanding of what people in the commercial real estate space are really thinking about what we're trying to talk to them about. And are we right? Are we wrong? Do we have an understanding of what they're interested in? Or are we kind of just thinking about, this is what I have to sell, so I'm going to go in there and I'm just going to hit them in the face with what I have to sell, rather than needs analysis and what are you thinking and how is it going on your end. So you heard him yesterday on our first panel of View from the Top. John Gilbert is probably the most prominent person that I know in the industry from an enlightenment standpoint. He is very knowledgeable about our business. He is extremely anxious to share his thoughts and has done this event with me as I guess a huge thank you, and I owe a debt of gratitude to him for being here and helping us. But I wanted him to talk today about from his standpoint, when someone comes to talk to him, what's important, what is he looking to hear, and how is he digesting that information. So without further ado, John, please come on up. Thank you so much for doing this, John. I appreciate it.
Oh, he's looking fine, Rich. Manhattan all the way. I love it. I love it.
Thanks, Rich. I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff that you asked me to. It was amazing. We all have our journeys to get to places, and yesterday morning, I got up plenty of time to get to the airport, and of course the Whitestone Bridge was jammed. I couldn't get across the bridge. I had to go over the Triborough, and literally I was that guy, the last guy on the plane that everybody's like, oh, he's the jerk we're waiting for, and luckily got in and got down here. Pulled a hamstring sprinting through, trying to do an O.J. Simpson through the airport, so I realized, I can't do this anymore. But thanks to Rich and Aaron and team here, I think we all come together and share ideas, learn stuff, ask questions, and get to know people that we never knew before. So it's a great opportunity to do that. I want to talk about 4 things today, which none of them sound connected, but I think hopefully by the end of the talk they will be. The first is Pablo Picasso. The second thing I want to talk about is crude oil. The third thing I want to talk about is the chemistry of memory. And the fourth thing I want to talk about is our precious Mother Earth. So, why Pablo Picasso? Right before Pablo Picasso died, he was asked what he thought about computers. And being the very blunt person that he was, he said, they are useless. And even though we all know that they're not useless, the reason why he said they were useless, I think, is really important. And the reason he said that is because they only give us answers. And the important thing in life is how we frame the question, how we focus on a problem and search for that solution and be as specific as we possibly can be. In my own experience, 55 Broad Street, 25 years ago, vacant building, nobody wanted it, Maytag repairman sitting in the lobby waiting for somebody to come by, nobody was. The question we had to ask ourselves is, how do we differentiate that vacant, seemingly obsolete building from all other buildings that were surrounding us? And the answer that I think I briefly shared yesterday when I was up here was that we created the New York Information Technology Center. We created the first building in the world that actually brought optical fiber to the desktop, meeting this new world of content creators head on and giving them all the relevancy, all the raw materials that they needed, which were basically a solid building, a community of like-minded people bandwidth, and ultimately flexible space. The second time a big question came up was we were thrown into a meeting with Con Edison, and they wanted to give us external data feeds. And the question was, how can we create or what do we need to create in terms of a system that would allow us to take that external data, mix it with our internal data, and make it actionable within 30 seconds? The answer to that was we needed an operating system. This phone that someone left behind has an operating system. Our buildings needed an operating system. We said, let's go find those guys and gals. They didn't exist, so we had to create it ourselves. Again, what was that question that we were trying to ask and answer? What was the problem that we were trying to solve? You know, I look back, my grandfather designed, and were with telecommunications people, or at least related to that, he designed the very first transatlantic telephone cable and did the prototype in 1930 from Key West to Havana, Cuba, and then spent the next 25 years of his life trying to figure out how do we energize those electrons that are connected to, that are attached to voice data, and get it from Newfoundland to Oban, Scotland. He figured it out. But he framed the question. Interestingly, that cable was connected in 1955. Sam Rudin built his first office building in 1955. Bill Rudin and I created the first smart building at 55 Broad Street, and we launched it on Albert Einstein's birthday, which we had no clue it was Albert Einstein's birthday. My 12-year-old son at the time said, "Oh, Dad, March 14th, you guys are having your grand opening. You're doing it on Albert Einstein's birthday." And I'm like, "Thank you." We then used that in our marketing ever since. He died in 1955. What does any of that mean? I have no idea, other than in life, at least in my life, and I think I share this with others, is that serendipity, things that seem not to be connected, but when you allow those dots to be connected, powerful things happen. And I think it's at events like this where ideas, kernels of ideas are planted and large sequoias are allowed to grow. Second item, crude oil. Everybody says that data is the new oil. I'm like, not really. Not unless you have software that can refine it to make it useful. Not unless you have software that ultimately can take that gooey, dark, seemingly useless product and make it useful. Address problems, address questions, answer those questions. And that's why we created Nantum. Because we knew in our minds that we didn't want to die a death of multiple dashboards. We knew that I've got a water app, I've got an electricity app, I've got a steam app, I've got an occupancy app. If all those things weren't connected into a single integrated platform, they would individually be useless. Back to Picasso, right? Useless. So, we created that integrated platform, and now we can take all those data sets so that occupancy can influence fan speed. Occupancy can ultimately correlate it against fan speed, can reduce our energy consumption hugely. Occupancy correlated against fan speed can ultimately reduce our carbon footprint, which will allow us in New York City, we've just got a new law that was passed, Local Law 97, that will allow us to avoid ridiculous penalties and fines. So as we look at our data, and it doesn't matter what business you're in, whether you're real estate, whether you're telecommunications, whether you're putting DAS systems in, whether you're focused on 5G or you're focused on CBRS, that data that we're collecting needs to find a home, needs to live somewhere, needs to ultimately be made useful. And that's where software comes in. And I think, at least from the real estate standpoint, it's one of those inflection points in our history where if we are able to solve this concept of utilizing data and be data-driven, our world changes. I can see our world changing right now. Which leads me to the third item that I wanted to talk about, the chemistry of memory. Anybody ever hear of a gentleman by the name of Eric Kandel? Eric Kandel won the Nobel Prize in 2000 because he figured out, he proved that the chemistry of memory was as constant as the speed of light. Think about that. Einstein theorized that there was only one pure constant, and that was the speed of light. He gave us energy equals mc squared, telling us that even the smallest of particles held an enormous amount of potential energy. So Kandel takes this ugly little water slug and identifies the serotonins that ultimately that slug uses to remember, and then shows in the human brain that we're using that same exact chemistry. Now, why does that matter? Machine learning, as we look at that software that's going to refine that crude oil of data, that's going to make it useful, that is ultimately going to save the earth because we're going to figure out ways to optimize and make our buildings more efficient, is a constant. We need to memorize those patterns. We then wrap machine learning algorithms around them and we say, okay, here's a pattern, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, whoops, suddenly day 5, I've got abnormal water consumption at 3 o'clock in the morning. I've got a leak. I've got a flushometer in a tenant space that has burst. And if I don't fix that quickly, it's going to run into my elevator pit and that building will be out of commission for days. So this concept of memory, this concept of the chemistry of memory, utilizing memory, memorizing patterns is hugely important. It is at the core of everything that is artificially intelligent. It is at the core of everything that is machine learning. It is at the core of what Min's going to talk about this afternoon in terms of cybersecurity, both in the IT space and in the OT space. Understanding that, wait a minute, this is my normal data flow, data patterns. Now suddenly there's an anomaly. I should be alarming that. It's going to be what Darlene Pope is going to talk about this afternoon as to what is now and what comes next. Because the memorization of pattern recognition, I think is the most important aspect of the way we look at our real estate management today. I know that every day my occupancy pattern is different. I can show you right now that I've got 20,343 people across our office portfolio. I know that I'm burning roughly 20 megawatts of power. Interesting correlation, right? Each of us is a 100-watt light bulb. Each of us takes, that amount of energy, that 100 watts, to ultimately allow us to feel comfortable. Fascinating correlation. Wouldn't think about it, but it's there. We also know that the vast majority of people, when they come back from lunch and they sit in their office, it's cold, it's freezing. And the reason for that is because those fans have not been correlated against those people leaving the building and are just blowing that volumetric air as though everybody's still in their desk, at their desk or in their seats. What a waste of energy. Our curve now, typical energy curve, bell shape. our curve today, we call it a double humped camel. Because that divot in the middle of the day, we're saving in a single building a megawatt and a half simply by correlating two data sets that never ever talked to each other before, that never ever knew the other one existed. And yet through software, through Nantum, we can create that correlation and that we can ultimately save an enormous amount of energy, and the best part is I can enhance the experience of my customers. We've cut our hot and cold calls by 75 to 80%. People feel better. People aren't cold, aren't too hot, too cold. Simply by using that same data set that is saving one building over $1 million a year. On average, 55 cents a foot. So, the chemistry of memory. And another little bit about Eric Kandel. He wrote an amazing book of the age of innovation. Has anybody seen the painting by Gustav Klimt, The Woman in the Gold Dress? There's a movie about it, Ryan Reynolds. When you look at that, and you can actually see it on 79th Street, the Newey Gallery in New York. And it's a painting of Adele Bloch-Bauer. And Adele Bloch-Bauer was this amazing woman. I think she's reincarnated into Bonnie Manter. Because Adele Bloch-Bauer in the early 1900s would hold salons. She would invite people into her home and ignite conversations. She would have Gustav Klimt sitting next to Freud. She would have the head of the Vienna hospital part of this mix. So when you go online or you go to the Newey Gallery and see this painting, take a very close look at her dress. And this was a painting that the Nazis stole, that the family fought to get it back, and Ron Lauder spent a gazillion dollars to buy it, and it's now available to be seen by the public. But if you look at her dress, the fractals that make up that dress are actually nuclei of cells. Because as a result of Adele Bloch-Bauer, and she is the woman in the gold dress, bringing these people together, Klimt actually saw cells of a nuclei of a cell through a microscope which had just been created. And started this whole concept of, rather than looking at ourselves from the outside in, looking at ourselves from the inside out, which then Freud took and changed the entire field of psychotherapy. So as we come from different places and different directions and different livelihoods, this wonderful mosh pit of exchange of ideas, if we're open, if we listen, if we're truly willing to share, can create amazing things. That's why I like to come to events like this, because I'll always walk away with at least one or two kernels of ideas or people that I've met that I can ultimately go back, bring back to Rudin Management and do something with. Make that product better. Make the experience of our customers more enjoyable. So check out that painting. It's really an unbelievable thing when you think of that. This was 1906, I think, Vienna. It was before World War I. It was suddenly this opening of ideas and amazing conversation between artists and psychotherapists and scientists and doctors, which just created this enormous explosion of ideas, thought, and great art. Fourth item, our precious Mother Earth. Davos, 3 weeks ago, I guess it is now, unbelievable. You had Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase. We're going, largest bank in the world, we're going carbon neutral. The triumvirate that runs Microsoft, we're going carbon neutral. Apple, we're going carbon neutral. I don't know how many trillions of dollars when you add up just those three companies' market caps, but this was an enormous moment when ultimately our customers were saying to the world, hey, real estate, you better get your act together because we want to be able to tell our investors, tell our employees, and tell our prospective employees that we're going carbon neutral. So what does that mean for real estate? It means a lot. You know, it means ultimately that we've got to figure out ways to go buy renewable energy. Right now, we call it's Zone J in the city of New York. I can't buy either hydro, solar, or wind power. Does not exist. I will face fines. We also have to understand that at Rudin, we've cut our electrical consumption by 41%, our carbon by 48%, and our steam consumption by 48% by utilizing systems like Nantum. And yet, I as property owner, can only control 40% of that consumption pie. Our tenants control the other 60%. So great, I get an A, I still pay fines. Because the responsibility has been placed on us as property owners ultimately to knock on their door, on our tenants' doors and say, you have to cut your consumption. The problem with that is that am I going to be knocking on KPMG's door during tax season and say, hey boys and girls, time to go home, otherwise I pay fines, even though you're burning the midnight oil to try to do the taxes for your customers. It doesn't work. We are the city that never sleeps. We want to remain the city that never sleeps. So what needs to happen is that engagement between owner and our tenants to really identify areas that we can work together to reduce our consumption and reduce our carbon footprint. Has to happen. And we will make it happen. We've done some wonderful things with BlackRock, by decreasing, on top of those numbers that I just gave you, another 30% decrease. Simply by getting more and more granular, and this is why I'm so excited about CBRS. Because CBRS, for us, right now, when I try to run a parallel network, and I want to do it wirelessly, I run into Wi-Fi, I run into Blackstone's Wi-Fi, I run into KPMG's, I run into the NFL's Wi-Fi, all sorts of interference. All the issues that were raised this morning, or right before lunch, in terms of the fire safety issues. So, CBRS comes in and says, wait a minute, brand new spectrum, nice and clean, nobody else is on this, knock yourself out. Property owners. I thought I had 150 megahertz. I learned this morning I only have 70 because they're going to auction off 80 of it. That's 70's enough. That's a nice big pipe. We'll deal with that. But now that gives me the opportunity to go do all these things that I couldn't possibly do in a cost-effective way, which will ultimately allow me to get more and more granular on my data collection, which will then ultimately allow me to use my software to refine that data and make it useful by sharing it with my customers. It's a beautiful thing. This is really, really powerful, powerful stuff. Yeah, we've got some issues to plow through. Yeah, we've got SaaS, and it's not software as a service. System access supervisor, or whatever it was. It's a new term I have to learn. But ultimately, it answers that question that I haven't found an answer to. So, really, really important stuff. Now, the last thing that Rich asked me to talk about was, who's the most effective? We get approached by a lot of people, Proptech companies, people who want to put DAS systems in our buildings, people who want to talk to us about CBRS, people who want us to talk about whole waste management, everything, you name it. We run little cities, right? If I showed you, Nantum right now, that's 20,000. We're a distributed 20,000 person little city, and they're vertical. And I got to run transportation. I've got to make sure telecommunication gets delivered. I've got to make sure everybody's safe. I've got to keep people comfortable. I've got to keep them secure from a cyber standpoint. So what is most effective? What's most effective to me is somebody who sits down in my office and realizes that my time is as precious as theirs and gets right to the point. And back to that Picasso example, identifies the problem that they know that I need to solve and explains very clearly how their product solves that problem and answers that question. That's what's most effective to me. Because number one, I can see you've done your homework. You've attempted to understand my world and address my issues. Thumbs up. You realize that time, and I hate to be rude sometimes, but if someone will come and pitch, and I will literally stop it 10 minutes into it and say, listen, great product, don't need it, don't want it right now, nice knowing you. Don't take that personally. Take that really as education. On the other hand, if I've allocated an hour, and sometimes if it goes to an hour and a half, be ready for that too, because that shows that, okay, I'm digging deeper now. I'm chipping away at this thing, and we're going to solve this together. And I like what you're telling me. We're developing through a group of owners. There's about, 1.5 billion square feet that sits around the table. And we're developing something called the Data Bill of Rights. And it's more for Proptech companies. But we want to be very clear and establishing those pillars of the relationship that we hope to develop. First and foremost, the data is mine, or the Rudins. We spent the money, we took to build the building, we bought this dirt, we dug the hole, we poured a foundation, we set steel and glass, we paid a lot of money to brokers to tenant the building. We now want to take that data, remember it, learn from it, and share it. But that data is ours. We may license it to you to utilize it, but don't think you can walk into my office and say, well, I'm going to collect this data and it's mine. No, it's the owner's data. Second item, you've got to have a cybersecurity strategy. Got to have it. At least SOC 2 compliant. You've got to have your data has to be encrypted. You've got to ultimately be focused on if you're accessing or riding on top of a network that I'm already managing, that you're not going to create additional holes in that network and allow people to jump into into my network and cause problems. Min's going to talk about this with her panel, I'm sure, but there's amazing tools right now that can sniff those networks and identify holes. We just found several sensors that were wide open holes in several of our buildings, used to sniff out chemical substances. We shut those ports down because those are opportunities for bad people to jump into our network. We get about 1,000 to 2,000 attacks a day, mostly benign bots and things like that. But the cybersecurity piece is a huge issue, and you've got to be able to have a strategy that's clear and explainable if you're going to do business with the Rudin family. Third piece, open API. Again, we're not going to live to die the death of multiple dashboards. Unless you have an API that can connect into Nantum, we're not interested in doing business with you. And not that we don't like your product, but because I know that unless it goes to that platform, that single pane of glass, it's not going to get used. It's going to be useless data. So we're very focused on that. We want to be clear. We want you, the vendor community, to understand the way we think and the way we ultimately want this data to be expressed. So, happy to answer any questions you may have. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I think it's important to have open conversation, and that's been happening for the last 2 days. So thank you all very, very much.
John, before you get off, thank you very much. Before you get off, one of the things that I find people in our end of the business don't always have an understanding of is Proptech. So people don't know the term, some people have heard it before. Would you kind of give your definition of Proptech, what it is, how it affects you, and what the discussion around Proptech is at this stage and how it dovetails in with what we're here talking about?
Sure. So to me, Proptech is any type of application that is attempting to plug into or mine data from real estate. You know, real estate is the largest asset class by far in the world. Trillions and trillions of dollars. So, and we're last to this party. You know, transportation, we've seen, you know, location-based services. I think Darlene's going to talk about that this afternoon. All of that stuff, which was happening outside of our buildings, is just now coming inside of our buildings. And it's hugely important that we have the infrastructure that allows that to happen. Again, I go back to CBRS, and maybe I've totally drank the Kool-Aid, but that's a really important aspect of having infrastructure that can grab that data. So to me, Proptech is any, you know, elevator analysis is Proptech. Water analysis is Proptech. Location-based services, you know, tenant experience apps, all of that stuff is anything that wants to plug into a DAS network, a CBRS network, is Proptech.
Got it. Thank you. Questions? Anybody want to ask anything from the floor? There you go, man.
Thanks. John, thanks for the shout out. So Australia announced, I think, maybe, I'm trying to remember, last year about that they were using blockchain technology for real estate. I'm curious, are you guys implementing blockchain technology within your software or any type of in your portfolio?
Yes, we are. I think blockchain, and there's some interesting companies down on the floor if you're interested in blockchain that you can go check out. I stopped in there after lunch or before lunch. I think blockchain is most important in the energy procurement space, especially when you jump into renewables. So we're working very closely with major bank, major accounting firm to create a platform where two things can happen. One, I can procure, once they're available in Zone J, renewable electrons of energy. Now, why do we need blockchain for that? Is that I need an immutable system of truth, because the government's going to knock on my door and they're going to say, oh, really? You bought some renewables, solar power or hydropower or wind power? Prove it. And unless I have that blockchain ledger, and there's a company called SwitchX that handles on the supply side, we connect the blockchain to Nantum, which is monitoring in real time on the demand side. Trade is made, electrons purchased, immutable source of truth, good to go. I don't pay a fine. So yeah, I think blockchain is very important. You know, everybody says blockchain's a technology. It's really not a technology. It's a ledger. It's a ledger that is immutable. You know, there's actually a company downstairs that is giving the good housekeeping sign of approval to blockchain applications, which I think is very interesting. But yeah, no, I think blockchain is hugely important, especially if we have to prove to our governmental regulatory entities that we did what we said we did, and not have to go through this crazy audit trail, nonsensical waste of time, spending money where it doesn't need to be spent. Boom. Got the blockchain, there it is, thank you very much. Whether you tokenize it or not, I kind of like the tokenization of it as long as there's liquidity at the end of the day. Good question.
Thanks, man. Other questions?
You talked about, excuse my voice, you talked about how you were able to reduce complaints, hot and cold complaints from your tenants. Can you tell us what's the #1 complaint you get from your tenants today?
The rent's too high? And I just broke the Rudin rule, which we're allowed to joke around about anything but money, so forgive me, Sam, Jack, and Lou. I think the biggest complaint is probably hot and cold calls. I mean, before Nantum, that we dropped those down. After that, I think it's probably elevator service. I think people have, especially with the destination dispatch, everybody know what that is. You plug in the floor and tells you what elevator to go to, and then you get on the elevator, and if you're not used to it, you're looking for the thing to, the button to plug. So I think people get used to very rapid service, and then when it's not, they get upset about that. But frankly, that's about it. We don't really, you get your cleaning issues, but then that's really with the cleaning contractor. But we're the first in line in terms of getting complaints. But so we get some of that. But generally I'm a lucky guy. I get to work with the Rudin family, and their reputation way before I got there was stellar. And our job is just don't screw it up. Let's keep that stellar reputation intact, and we've got a phenomenal team that we work with that allows us to do that.
So John, I'd be remiss if I didn't try to lean on you and tell a story that I love so much. You wrote for the magazine half a year ago or 9 months ago about your experiences as a young man with the horses. I love that story, and I can't hear it enough, so I think this crowd would get a kick out of it too. You mind taking us all back to that point in your life?
Well, this is a long time ago, but the only job that I had that is better than the one I have right now was wrangling horses in Glacier National Park in Montana, summers of 75, 76, and 77. And if you don't know Glacier, it's a unique national park in that its elevation, the highest mountain is only 11,000 feet. And so you can hike that national park without experiencing any type of altitude sickness. And they also have 2 chalets that you can only get to by horseback or by foot. And our job was to keep them supplied with groceries, propane. We'd take 2,000 pounds of groceries and propane on 10 horses every week. And we literally took eggs. We would pack eggs, and we would put them in panniers, and that would always be the horse that was right behind you. And the horse's name was Shorty, because you wanted a short horse because you could see all the other horses behind you. And we had a contest every year of who could break the fewest number of eggs on the way up to either Granite Park or Sperry Chalet. And I was going to win. I had this thing nailed, and it was my last trip up to Granite Park. Granite Park was made famous by the Night of the Grizzlies, the book. Literally 2 women were attacked and eaten by grizzlies on the same night, 40 miles away from each other. 2 different bears, so that's where we were headed. And I'm going up, and I got my rhythm. It's you talk about rhythms of buildings. The rhythm of 10 pack horses behind you is a rhythm, because they don't once they stop, they get edgy, and bad things happen. That's when wrecks happen. So I'm going, and we got this thing, and I'm like, oh, I'm almost there. Last couple switchbacks, my horse stops dead. Ears are going like this and like this. I'm like, come on, Rebel, come on, we got this thing beat. Let's go. And wouldn't move. So I had to get off the horse, literally, grab the horse by the reins, tie him to the other horses, so now I have 11 string, and start walking around the switchback. I come around the switchback, and there's a grizzly bear up on his haunches, snoot up in the air, and I got 200 pounds of meat on the very last horse that's been sitting overnight in, a hot shed in Packer's Roost. So what the heck do? I can't turn around. I've got an axe. We're not allowed to use guns in a national park. And there was only one thing to do, which was to act crazier than that grizzly bear. And so I'm jumping up and down and, screaming and yelling and waving my hat and throwing rocks at him. And he's just kind of looking at me, going like, yeah, right. And God bless, he took off. And I got the rest of the way up the mountain, shaking like a leaf. But I won the contest of, not that I'm a competitive person or anything, but I did win the contest for breaking the fewest number of eggs in the summer of 1977. That and a couple bucks for getting on the subway.
John, thank you so much.
A couple questions in the back there. That's a good start.
I'll just close it out real quick with this question. You talked about the things that people complain about the most in the building, but we are here talking about the connected building. So where does the connectivity complaints come in on that scale? You named about 5 different things, and connectivity wasn't one of the things people complain about. So I was just kind of curious how that fits into the picture.
Yeah, no, and it's true. What we started back in 1995, I should have probably spent more time on this, was to create carrier-neutral risers in our buildings. You may or may not remember, but in 95, 96, Congress, number one, we had telecommunications deregulation, right? So you had all these brand new companies that were knocking on our door to get into our buildings. And Congress was saying, hey, property owners, this is very important to us. We're gonna ram universal access down your throats, and you've got to let every one of these carriers in your building. And I'm like, I don't have any vertical riser capacity to let them run their wires. So we looked at that and we said, okay, what's the question, right? How do we solve this problem? And the answer was, we, Rudin, will put in carrier-neutral risers, dark fiber, not lit fiber, and create a meet point in the basement or in the middle of the building, ideally, where carriers can stack their cages. And if you're a tenant on the 30th floor and you've got AT&T today and you want Verizon or Sprint or Deutsche Telekom tomorrow, we don't have to run any new cabling to you. We just take it from the head end and take it away from AT&T and give it to your carrier of choice. So we did that. We were one of the first owners to do that. I think that's pretty much standard today, but that has solved, because 3 good things happened. Tenants got multiple choice of carriers. Beautiful, check the box. Carriers got a just plug in, already built infrastructure. Check the box, easily deployed. And third, we got to sleep at night knowing that I wouldn't ever have spaghetti again in my vertical risers that I couldn't unscramble and untangle.
We have one last question.
Sorry, you mentioned the value to Rudin for CBRS, right, and the analytics that you can get from it, of course. With the available bandwidth to yourself and others, what do you see as services, perhaps, or how you monetize that internally or externally to the people that are occupying your building?
Yeah, I mean, I think Darlene's gonna talk about that this afternoon. I don't want to steal her thunder, but I think the sky is the limit. What do we know as fact? What we know as fact is that the more data, the more granular data I can collect, the more efficient I can make my building, and the better experience that my tenants will be able to achieve. I know I can save more money. I know they can save more money. And what's fascinating about this is that the ability, if all of our tenants, all of them now have chief sustainability officers, all of them are creating a corporate sustainability strategy. They cannot achieve any messaging in that without the owner sharing their data, our data, with them. So now suddenly and this is the BlackRock example, the Blackstone is another one, KPMG is another one, where now the data, I'm not just talking to the facilities people, I'm talking directly to the chief sustainability officer, and they're like, oh my God, you can give me this data? You can benchmark this? You can allow me to have messaging to my employees, my investors, going forward? Yes, I can. And what does that do for us? It enhances the relationship that I have now with that customer. I'm more valuable to them today than I was. Now, in terms of services, location-based services, the biggest problem with GPS is that it can't scale within buildings. When I see CBRS, I'm like, oh my God. Now I've got a network that can pull floor-by-floor data, that can ultimately allow the airflow to be pinpointed to occupancy that is on that floor on a floor-by-floor basis, that can ultimately, from a safety standpoint, now I can have Bluetooth beacons, and if the fire department or police department or anybody, the ambulance, if they've got a wearable sensor, boom, I know exactly where they are on a 3D basis, what floor, what quadrant of that floor, and can get to them immediately. Or just ping off of their phone, use that phone as that sensor. So the ability to look at, and I think I mentioned this yesterday, but the ability to look at a building like the human anatomy, it really goes back to Kandel and Adele Bleyer-Block, is buildings have always had a heart, engine room, boiler room, pumping, pumping, pumping. Now they have a brain, Nantum. Final frontier, central nervous system. And if you can give me that CBRS central nervous system that is ubiquitous throughout the building, and I can put a sensor anywhere I want to and grab that data, whoa, unbelievable, unbelievable opportunity to do that, as long as you have all three of those pieces. And the heart's there. But it's all about the brain, and it's all about the central nervous system.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John, thank you so much. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.